How dare you make that ruling? You are biased and unfit to sit on this bench.
The cup was nothing but coffee, and it was left in his hand before Reasons could pick it up. The hot liquid surged through the bench and the front of Judge Frank Caprio's robe, causing the courtroom to freeze. The individuals didn't take a breath, they merely breathed. The steam rose from the papers on the bench. Coffee dribbled onto the floor in sluggish motion. Judge Caprio remained composed and did not raise his voice. He turned to the bailiff and reassured him, saying, "Officer Harris, secure the defendant." After 30 seconds, Colin Reed was handcuffed 5 seconds later. It took arrogance to recognize the lack of temperature control. If you're still a proponent of patience, please share if you are over 40. The morning started off differently than usual. Case number 2025 TR 9184 was called in by Miss Reyes at 9:00 a.m. in Providence Municipal Court. Colin Reed entered the court with the large coffee cup, which was sleeved and had lids that click. He mumbled to the front row, "Let's put an end to this." The amount of $640 was owed, which included reckless driving, multiple unpaid fines, and contempt of court for 2 previous missed hearings. Colin interrupted and clarified that he wasn't wasting a day's time for pocket change. Judge Caprio reflected by saying, "You're wasting character, right?" The narrator recounts that the morning had been typical until someone deemed it more valuable than anyone else's. Miss Reyes included a note in the file. The defendant had been cautioned twice about missing court dates. A bench warrant was issued and subsequently issued upon his arrival. This was his 3rd chance. Officer Maria Torres was present to provide an explanation. At the age of 31, she was on traffic patrol in the Federal Hill area for 6 years. She reported seeing a vehicle traveling 53 mph in residential areas near Atwells Avenue on February 14th and activated all of her lights. The vehicle pulled over. Upon her arrival, the driver, Colin Reed, declined to provide his license. He proceeded to say, "Write tickets for peasants. I've got places to be." Officer Torres remained courteous. She clarified the offense and asked for identification again. He referred to her as having a meter with delusions and drove away before she could finish writing the citation. She notified the authorities, but he ignored it on 2 occasions. Judge Caprio paid close attention. When Officer Torres finished, he asked, "Did you feel threatened?" She paused. "Not physically," she replied, but dismissed her as she had a job that didn't require him to go anywhere. The narrator remarked that disrespect always comes out louder on government equipment when the insult is preserved, time-stamped, and unrememberable. Upon his return to the courtroom, Judge Caprio asked Colin why he had ignored 2 summons. Colin gave a stern answer, saying, "My job is more important than your time." Nevertheless, you are present, as Colin joked. It was not a nervous laugh. Instead, it was the kind of laugh that suggests the entire room is in your favor. While the judge read the file, he savored the sound of coffee and watched as steam rose from the cup like a visible ego. The narrator observed that entitlement always makes noise, with fingers tapping and sipping. At 10, 14, and 38 seconds, a M security camera 2 recorded the incident, and the narrator retold it frame by frame while Colin stood and whispered something in his voice. "This is a joke," Colin replied to Judge Caprio's inquiry, who then asked if he could repeat the sentence. The lid of the coffee cup popped out mid-flight, and Colin didn't hesitate to sit down. The bench, papers, and front of Judge Caprio's black robe were inundated with hot liquid, with steam and dampness forming at the edges of the papers and coffee falling onto the floor in thick drops. Judge Caprio remained motionless and refrained from removing his robe. He looked towards the bailiff and immediately requested restraint, while Colin was dragged back with his hands in less than 10 seconds. The courtroom remained composed this time. It breathed. Someone in the back row moaned, "Did that just happen?" The narrator clarifies that it was not served hot and disrespectfully, brewed in arrogance and hurled at the individual who didn't deserve it. Judge Caprio paused for 10 minutes, and the courtroom drew down, with people murmuring and looking back at the bench where coffee still frothy. He then walked to his chambers. He removed his robe, wiped the front with a wet towel, and washed his hands. He came back to the bench 9 minutes later, dry and calm but silent. The narrator remarked, "Angel raises the voice, authority sets the tone." Caprio didn't have to yell, he just had to come back and do it. The hearing continued. Colin Reed, still holding his handcuffs, was surrounded by a bailiff. He was accompanied by his public defender, Daniel Holt, who spoke first. "Your client, I deeply regret his misfortune. He lost his tempe." Lord. Judge Caprio acknowledged the inappropriateness and inexcuity of the matter, stating that he did not lose it and had thrown it. The court acknowledged that the evidence was accidental and deliberate. The security camera footage was viewed from 2 different angles. The court clerk's written statement about the disturbance, body cam footage from the bailiff, and Miss Ray's additional item were all included in the photo of the coffee stain on the bench. The legal department of Colin Reed, who works for Atlas Holdings, sent a voicemail to his employer that morning. She expressed her hope that the matter could be resolved without any public outcry. "This is an honorable and highly unusual act of kindness." The transcript revealed that Judge Caprio is willing to discuss any concerns directly. Influence is never considered neutral before accountability. The narrator notes that pressure may not always be felt with a raised voice. Sometimes it comes in the form of politeness and time stamping, asking for discretion while the coffee remains cold. Miss Ray's provided Judge Caprio with a thicker file that contained Colin Reed's past events, which were based on municipal and state records. Reed had been kicked out of the bar in Cranston 2 years ago for hurling ice at an attendant who instructed him to lower his voice, and he had also been cited for verbal harassment of one toll booth operator 1 year. A noise complaint made 6 months ago claimed that Colin had yelled threats through the wall, but no charges were filed. Judge Caprio read aloud from the summary and then looked up. He stated that he had been preparing for this moment his whole life. Colin lowered his eyes for the first time. The narrator reflects that the habit is just personality on repeat until someone records it and the joke becomes unfunny. Judge Caprio started his ruling. According to Mr. Reed, you hurled hot coffee at a judge in an open courtroom, assaulted an official, and caused disruptions in legal proceedings. You destroyed court documents because you believed your time was more valuable than the process that ensures everyone's safety. He paused. The evidence was overwhelming. The security footage, witness statements, and physical evidence, along with your own words, provide evidence of what happened. You have been found guilty of disorderly conduct, assault on a public official, contempt of court, and property damage. He fined $1,200, but stayed with $600 of it pending the completion of the restorative plan within 6 months. The conditions were specific. Colin would offer a formal apology to the staff in the courtroom, including Miss Ray's, the maid service workers, and the cleaning crew who had to clean up the coffee stain. He would also undertake 160 hours of community service with the Providence Burn Unit Foundation, an organization that provides care for patients recovering from severe burns and thermal injuries. In addition, he would write and publicize his service through an essay titled "Respect Isn't Temperature Dependent," which is set to be broadcast on the stage, with at least 1,000 words, Impulse versus Integrity. He asserted that mercy is not a discount, but rather an agreement with yourself. The narrator explains that Colin came to pick up his ticket after leaving his character. If you think that anger is more potent than control, take heed of the court hearings, as these stories demonstrate that silence is the most effective way to respond to violence. Judge Caprio spoke to the court once again, stating that this incident highlights a vulnerability. He emphasized that he would recommend policy changes immediately, including banning beverages outside of the security checkpoint. The prohibition of alcohol consumption in the courtroom was followed by a plan to create an anonymous staff assault log, which allows all municipal employees to report any verbal or physical aggression without any fear of retaliation. Additionally, panic buttons have been installed at every clerk and bailiff station, as per the new regulations. He conveyed his appreciation for your professionalism today, emphasizing the need for discipline. The narrator clarifies that the rules do not entail retribution. The Providence Burn Unit Foundation was informed by Colin Reed on a Monday morning in late April that he was expected to either file paperwork or attend orientation, as it is the insurance for decency that protects those who come to the system every day. Instead, he was assigned to patient support, which involved sitting with burn victims during their recovery sessions, aiding them in their daily activities, and listening to their stories. On his first day of service, Angela showed him her hands, still wrapped in gauze that were still healing. She said, "Whenever I reach for something hot, I hesitate. Despite my body's ability to remember things, my mind doesn't." Colin listened attentively and then began writing his apology to the quarter. Staff, the initial apology was 3 sentences, which were polite but unclear. David, a nurse who had been working in the burn unit for 12 years, read it and returned it to him. "This form letter sounds like another person's form of communication, so write this again," he said. The second version, written by Colin, was 2 pages long and apologized for the violence and disruption caused by treating people as obstacles rather than doing their jobs. He also shared that he had spent 6 weeks working with burn victims and had learned how to trust in the safety of the world and not unexpectedly injure oneself. He penned a message of remorse. Miss Reyes received the letter, read it twice, and then phoned the foundation and left an announcement. Colin's apologies were acknowledged, and he completed 160 hours, followed by 20 more. He began volunteering at fundraising events and patient advocacy on weekends. One afternoon, he sat with a man named Jerome, who had suffered burns from the accident and was scarred. He was practicing writing with his fingers that didn't fully close, and Colin observed him. "The most challenging aspect isn't the pain, but rather the ability to endure it." Colin nodded and pondered the cup of coffee that had fallen from his hand. He pondered the 30 seconds it necessitated to dismantle what took years to establish his reputation, credibility, and self-control. The narrator observes that rehabilitation is not a trend on social media. It takes place in tranquil surroundings where no one is present, and the only applause is internal, while the public service announcement took 2 attempts. The first version was scripted, rehearsed, and ill-informed. David's supervisor rejected it, as if he were referring to someone reading a script. The second draft, written by Colin Reed, was unrefined but genuine. He addressed a simple wall and stated, "I was angry and threw hot coffee at someone 6 months ago. I believed that anger gave me a strong appearance, but I was mistaken. It made me look uncontrollable. I've been working with burn survivors for the past 6 months. I've observed their narratives. If left unregulated, the impact of heat won't be felt. Respect is not temperature-related. It's not something you turn on when you have it. It's a routine you practice daily, even when you're frustrated. If you believe throwing something can make you feel powerful, it will be wrong and cause harm to those who didn't deserve it. I know because I did it and I'm still learning how to fix it." The video was released and received more than 80,000 views in just 2 weeks, with a lot of feedback. Colin read all of them, but he didn't give a damn. He had just finished reading. On one afternoon, Officer Maria Torres went to the burn unit and presented a community partnership certificate to them. She observed Colin conversing with one of the patients in the hallway. She remained silent and observed while he was gone, leaving Officer Torres in shock. She nodded and said, "I heard you've been here. I wanted to see. I'm sorry for what I said and for how I did it. You were doing your job, but I felt I was disrespecting it." Officer Torres expressed his gratitude, stating that he was glad the individual was present. The narrator asserts that forgiving doesn't entail a transaction. Rather, it's about acknowledging that people can change when they're willing to accept the discomfort of their past self. Collins submitted his reflection essay on the final day of the deadline. He wrote 1,200 words and discussed impulse, the gap between sensation and action, and the choice between throwing and throwing. He also stated that heat is more than coffee and words, including choosing to be angry rather than being disciplined, as evidenced by his writing. I threw a cup towards the judge because I believed it would give me strength, but it didn't. It took 6 months of sitting with people who survived actual burns for it to become apparent that the heat I used was nothing compared to what they endured. They didn't pick it, I picked it. The essay was submitted and read in its entirety by Judge Caprio. Colin returned to Providence Municipal Court alone after 6 months and 2 weeks, with no access to an attorney or employer representatives present. Miss Reyes referred to him. After reviewing the compliance report, Judge Caprio completed all 160 hours and added 20 more. An apology letter was submitted and accepted. A PSA was published and distributed. After submitting the essay, the judge looked up and uttered the words, "You threw coffee at me. You assaulted this court, and you've spent 6 months proving that a single moment shouldn't be the defining moment. I'm paying you $600 today to settle the remaining portion of your fine. Nonetheless, you must commit to upholding the standards you've set." Colin nodded and felt his hands shake. He believed that throwing coffee would enhance his physical appearance. "I am." Aware that stillness is more potent, Judge Caprio responded, "Keep it. It's the only thing you won't spill." According to the narrator, Colin's departure was not due to a reduction in the fine, but rather because control is less important than regret. Judge Caprio implemented several policy changes within 3 months, such as banning all beverages from statewide courthouses and establishing an anonymous staff assault reporting system that is now accessible online and through specialized phone lines. Panic buttons were placed at each clerk's station in Providence Municipal Court, and there have been no complaints of physical assault. The story was featured on local television under the headline, "Judge responds to violence with reform, not retaliation." The narrator argues that justice doesn't equate to revenge, but instead it repairs. Its goal is to educate and prevent the next person from making the same mistake, rather than seeking revenge. Colin Reed reacted to the heat with humility. A moment of fury earned 6 months of contemplation. He entered the courtroom with the belief that his anger was justified, but he left aware that justification isn't the solution to removing coffee stains, restoring trust, or reducing the fear that settles in an atmosphere of violence. Judge Caprio did not utter a rebuke. He didn't blend violence with noise. He simply displayed a reflection and urged him to reveal his true self, which he did. Colin's actions were not flawless, but rather gradual after 6 months of serving, apology, and self-reflection. The narrator emphasizes that transformation is not attainable in court. In burn units, in handwritten letters, and in quiet moments when no one is watching, Judge Caprio left his chambers that evening with a note card that said, "The moment you lose control, the camera of the mind lingers on the empty bench. It's just like losing control over impulsive behavior." The courtroom is a place where violence can be heard and disciplined without shouting. Should courts implement measures to teach anger management in every sentence? Share your thoughts below if you agree with Judge Caprio's belief that silence is the best medicine and that the most effective response to heat is silence. This is for storytelling purposes only, not for legal advice or reporting.